genre.
Welcome to Beyond Geek By Night, where we go behind the scenes of the Geek By Night podcast. On today's show, we will be discussing the series finale, Heroes by Day. This is the first of multiple Beyond episodes we will have to discuss the series finale and series as a whole. And today we will be discussing writing and production. I am your host, Matt Bennett. With me today, I have Scott Carelli.
Hi.
Cass Fredrickson.
Hello.
Nick Jimenez.
Hello.
And Chelsi Kern.
Hello.
There's no true way to summarize this epic finale, the final episode of Geek by Night, Heroes by Day, but let's just start with the Alpha Dogs are stopped thanks to Max Carmichael betraying Billy once and for all. The Last Man's plan to destroy the grid is overthrown when Victor Conrad, the best of them, sacrifices his life to save all of McKinney City. Billy and the Last Man are arrested, and the gang begins their new lives. So, where I'd like to start is with individual characters' stories ending. Famously, the writers of Mad Men talked about how in their writing process for each season, they would break the premiere and then outline the finale and then write everything in between. And this sort of forced them to focus on the end point of all the characters throughout that storyline. Mm-hmm. When thinking about where all the characters ended up in Geek by Night, did you know where they would be and just had to get them to that point? Or did you sort of find it along the way, or sort of a mix?
Sort of a mix, but I do know that when we were breaking this, these like final batch of episodes, we did go through. Let me see when this was. When was this done? It looks like August of 2021 is when we wrote this, or when we last worked on this, and we sort of like worked out like a bunch of ideas, and that's generally how we do things. Is like, you know, we know what the episode is going to entail, and we just sort of like throw a bunch of stuff on the board, and then we figure out how it's going to be a story. But with this in particular, I remember we took a day, maybe more than one day, and we went through every single one of our characters and either did a full story circle for them for the finale, or we did a sort of like series, like look back on the character and figured out how to, figured out like what their sort of like 4-act structure is, because with character arcs, it tends to be a 4-act structure because you have a midpoint where a shift happens typically as well. And so in a lot of people, like, for example, I'll just, let me just pull one up. Let's see. So, well, perfect. So, with Victor, right, we have, act 1 being a meaningless sacrifice. That's where he starts the show. Is making a meaningless sacrifice, or at least to him, it felt like a meaningless sacrifice, or a meaningless sacrifice in that, like, he is like, I'm going to be a hero, and like kills himself essentially, and then he has a meaningless existence, until he becomes this sort of like de facto kind of like teacher mentor to the underdogs, in which he finds this purposeful existence. Also, I think through his time in the heaven, for a lack of better term, and then ends the show making a purposeful sacrifice. So he goes meaningless sacrifice, meaningless existence, purposeful sacrifice. And so we did stuff like that with every single character in the show to try and figure out what would feel thematically, what would feel like, okay, this feels like the correct vibe for these characters. The actual like elements of like what that would look like all came out of story and grew out of like the many discussions that we had about these characters. But that was sort of our starting point, was like, this is what's going to feel the most satisfying, is if they end up in a place that feels like this. And then we kind of figured that out. I don't know if you guys remember any more details beyond that, but
I remember doing that
yeah.
for like hours, but I don't remember like details.
Yeah.
What's so interesting about Victor is he gets to experience both sides of meaninglessness,
Mm-hmm.
like the sort of brutal as existential kind of like the comical side where he's just like stuck in this box and he's just like he has no body and whatever. But then when he's in the program, he gets to sort of experience the positive of meaninglessness, which is like, oh, I have nothing to do, I have nothing to accomplish, so I have no choice but to just sort of stare at the sunset and be present. But then even that ends when it's like, well, no, now it is time to finally get purpose, but it comes at a great cost.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I think that it is a mix, but I think we went in with a sort of a modus operandi for every character. And they don't all land in the way that we built them. In this, but a lot of them do. Like for example, one of the things was like, oh, if Nathan started as a self-interested liar, he should end as a selfless liar. We couldn't figure out how to make what that even means or what that even sounds like, what that would even look like. So we didn't end up doing that. But then, we have like Madison here, who is an egoist supervillain, becomes an egoist anti-hero, then a team player anti-hero, and then ends the show as a team player supervillain. So, that's just kind of what we sort of felt would be the most satisfying thing. So,
because character-wise, that makes a lot of sense, having characters go through these arcs and sort of circle back, but it seems like where they are in their lives is returning to some semblance of the status quo that they were at when the show began. Cosmo is running a comic book shop, and Charlie is bringing together people who are heroes, and Elliot and Jeff are pitching an idea. And was that always the plan, to have people sort of return to some sort of status quo having changed?
I think so. I mean, I'm a big fan of the story circles, as these two know very well. Because I find it very satisfying. But yeah, I mean, I think that they started the show all, generally, a lot of them anyway, they all sort of felt like they were, they had a good life, but they clearly all needed something, and they just didn't know what they needed. And this, the events of the series lead them to, learning what it is that they were missing. Like in the case of Cosmo, it was, he had a lot of hang-ups about his dad. He needed to move on from that. The show has now allowed him to do that. So now he can run a comic book shop again, which is like what he loved doing, but it doesn't have all the baggage that he had before. Any thoughts on any of that, guys?
I don't know. Like, I'm also a fan of like the classical like hero's journey thing, and like I think a lot of like one of the themes of this season as a whole is like there's no such thing as normal. Like it's just like how these characters like adapt to like what's happened to them, and like how they take that and then like go on to live their life,
Yeah, I think the show has always been about this autobiographical kind of journey that we go on as our generation kind of goes through adulthood. And so, yeah, I think that's the journey that we've all kind of been going on these past few years, is discovering that there really is no normal, and your life, your present circumstances look a lot differently than maybe you were dreaming about when you were in your 20s. And what I really like about what's so cool about our show is, as often as it's like a hindrance, in this case, I like how big our cast is, because I think there's just as many characters who end up in really different places as find themselves in like the ironically familiar, like we have characters like Janet or Mindy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. that are like, oh wow, like I've really come a long way in a short amount of time, which happens sometimes to people.
Yeah.
Thinking back to when characters were first introduced, whether it's the first episode or earlier in the series, can you think of any characters whose arcs ended up being a very different shape than you expected, or maybe you were surprised by the direction that characters took compared to their introductions?
I think for me, the most surprising result out of this that really kind of just came out of nowhere was Joel and Charlie ending up together.
Yes.
That was not planned. That just sort of was like, it started happening and we're like, is this a thing? And we played around with it. And the more we played around with it, the more I think we all kind of liked it. Because, I think the thing that, goes unsaid in the show, but the reason that I personally like it so much is that it's this sort of beautiful full circle thing where Charlie had a best friend who fell in love with her sister and felt like she lost that friend. And now we end up in this place where she ended up falling in love with Lorelai's best friend, Joel, something that we had set up for a while. And I remember there were people who were like kind of shipping them low key.
I was.
Yeah. Yeah. There were some people that were shipping them pretty low key. I know Cass's husband was definitely one of them.
Yeah.
But I always felt that they had a platonic relationship. And then once they went on this mission together, in like part 1 of the finale, and they had that sort of like quiet moment together. It was just like, wow, the chemistry's kind of here with these two. And it's interesting to think about like Charlie being attracted to a guy who just kind of has, he's more complicated than I think people give him credit for, but he's also like very simple. Like, it's just like, he's easygoing, and that's very different from her vibe and something that she probably needs in her life. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that they ended up together. And I like the poetry of it.
Revenge.
Yes. What about you guys? Any character endings that don't feel so inevitable?
I think for me it would probably be, the cool thing about Billy is I think a villain should, we all agree that a villain should be like utilitarian to a certain extent. Like, he should support the hero's message, like negating that or something. And so Billy's gone through so many changes that I remember when we went to the jail scene, it was kind of this surprise for me, but the events were always so vague. Because Scott, do you remember when he was like immortal and was like from the 40s?
Oh yeah, well that was the old version of the show, right? That was the previous iteration. Yeah.
But all of that was kind of going through my head as I was like reading those pages for the first time of like, wow, this is a surprise, or I don't think I could have predicted this like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So two of you have sort of...
I wanted to hear Cass's answer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was gonna say Joel, but I think for like, I feel like the majority of the show, I really struggled as a writer with Elliot. And like I think when we were like breaking what became season 2, like I feel like Elliot was like really difficult to place. Like, Elliot was just kind of there. Like, everyone had their like niche, and then like we were like trying to figure out what to do with Elliot. So like and he's honestly like my least favorite underdog, but I think where he ends up is really nice. Because I think he's the one that struggles the most with, I just want to go back to normal. And like it's difficult to like make a character, like propel a character forward when all they want to do is go backward. So I think like I guess I'm just like surprised how satisfying I like Elliot's ending is for me.
Yeah, Elliot, I think
in that regard.
Elliot's interesting character, because you're totally right, and I think we were all struggling with him quite a bit,
because he's like the main character, and then he's just there.
I think he stopped being the main character after like the second episode, but yeah.
But we sort of like, it's almost like we revolted against that idea as we were making the first season.
Yeah.
Because that was sort of baggage from the old show when he kind of was like the Dante, like protagonist archetype of the 2000s. And then we realized we were interested in so many other things. But then by the end of the show, I also came to have a lot of affection for Elliot, because I started seeing myself in him in ways I didn't when I was younger. And that became a really rewarding experience as a writer.
Yeah, because I think, one of the things with Elliot is probably the character that kind of defines the show, I think, more than any other character. And especially thematically with like what we wanted this theme to be. And I don't even think we came to the conclusion that this is what the theme was until we figured out what our plan was with Elliot. But I have this written down on this like document where we were breaking all of season 2, which then later became season 2 and season 3. And which is the season thesis, which was, are we doing this because it's what we want to be doing, or are we doing it to avoid what we should be doing next? And I just know so many people in my life currently, especially millennials, who are all doing something and have been doing something for years that they clearly don't enjoy, but don't know what they should be doing next, or don't want the discomfort of, stepping away from the thing that they feel comfortable in, the world they feel comfortable in, to go to this next step to get the next thing that they want to do. And it's, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's, family stuff, there's life stuff, there's financial stuff. There's so many reasons, right? But this was, I found Elliot to be the opportunity to sort of like define that quality of millennials, of this feeling of like being trapped between like, I'm older, I should feel older, I should act older, but I don't. I also like still feel like a kid in a lot of ways. And is this what this is what adulthood is supposed to feel like? And that sort of like waffling all sort of boils into Elliot, who is this guy at the beginning of this show is like, no, I'm mature. I'm about to ask my girlfriend to marry me. I have a career. I have all of these things, but like he shouldn't be doing any of those, including but not limited to asking his girlfriend to marry him. Which we put the kibosh on that in a very low key way, which
was very really, understated.
Yeah, very understated way that I like a lot. I'm glad that I felt like we just said all we had to say about that already, and it was like we can just have it happen off screen. It's fine. But yeah, like I wanted him to end this show in a way of like, you know what? In a lot of ways, Gibson, the guy that represented everything I was trying to avoid being, was right in a way. Like, I'm not ready to give up on these fun, seemingly immature things. Instead, I want to find a way to incorporate them into my life. And then that ends up being the sort of like thesis statement of the whole show, which is that VO kind of thing that goes through all the characters that defines the title of the show, fucking finally.
But yeah, and there's also like a love story quality to it, where these two people realizing at the end of their journey, all they really want is each other.
Yeah,
and all I want with my life is just to spend time with this person that I really get, and they find a way to do that, and it feels like a victory despite all of the loss that they've had in different ways.
Yeah.
So let's travel back in time 10 years. We're going back to 2014. Scott, you made the decision to reboot Geek by Night. What made you decide to do it?
Well, beyond the fact that I was making that short film, The Cupid Division, and staring at 3 actors that I was like, man, they'd make pretty good versions of these characters. Beyond that, which was like the main thing. The other thing that I thought of, and the thing that I think convinced Nick to come on this, I don't know that it took that much convincing, but it convinced Nick to be like, no, I think you're right. I think there's something here. Which is that, like, when we originally made the show, the reason that I made it in 2007 was because I hated the Big Bang Theory. And I mean, yeah, that's literally, I was like, that's not how, what is this? Revenge of the Nerds? It's not the 80s anymore. This is not how we act. This is bullshit. And don't even get me started on like the episode where where one of them recites the Green Lantern oath and gets it wrong, and I'm like, that would never happen. Anyway, this is clearly written by people who aren't actually nerds and do not respect us in any way. So I was very angry about that, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna write a show about nerds that is like more true to like how they actually are. And that's what the main impetus behind making that show was. I didn't really know what what that was the thesis statement, is like being the anti Big Bang Theory. So when we rebooted it, we were coming back at it at 2014. This is 2 years past the Avengers being the biggest movie of all time. Geeks had successfully inherited pop culture. Where we were about to get a new legacy sequel to Star Wars, something that nobody thought was ever going to happen. It was a big period, and there was a lot of things going on. There was Comicsgate. There was, all of these things that all sort of like derived out of, how much power geeks suddenly had in culture. I think I was talking about all of those things with Nick when I was like, maybe we should bring the show back because we could talk about this thing and this thing and this thing and this kind of thing. And then Nick was like also spitballing, was like, oh my God, yeah, and this and this and this. And I think that was ultimately why we decided to bring the show back. Also, we didn't have to worry about recasting any of those roles because we had that in the bag. So I think that was ultimately the thing. And then we told Cass, like, please don't ever listen to the old show. Instead just read this pilot.
Yep.
Yeah. So so that was basically the reason, is like we just saw an opportunity for like to talk about a lot of things on top of how it sucked that it was like, that was 2007 and now it's 2014. We're 7 years later, and our lives like hadn't really changed that much. I mean, granted, Nick was in high school and then was like graduated from college at that point. But like beyond that, I mean, it was just like, it still felt like our wheels were spinning in a lot of ways. And we were like, why is this a thing? Especially for me, who at that point was a year away from turning 30. I was like, I'm about to turn 30. Like by the time my parents were 30, they had like all of their kids and, owned a house. And I have none of those things. I have this fucking show. That's it. That's all I got. So, I think it was all of those things. We're kind of like, we have so much to talk about and so much like stuff to get out. And it just felt like the perfect show to do that for, the perfect, vehicle for those kinds of thoughts.
That's so interesting, Scott. I never thought about it like this, but we're ending the show. I'm ending the show at the same age that you started the show.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
Yeah, I like when we were getting to write the finale in 2021, 2022, I was turning 30. I was, as I put it in the Discord, I think I roasted for it. I was undergoing my return to Saturn. And and I remember like writing especially Heroes by Day and being like, I get it now. I understand, and like I've been humbled in ways I couldn't have imagined, in 2016 or 2015 when we were like writing it. And it's I never thought about that. But I do remember, what's cool about Scott, what's so great about Scott as a collaborator is he does ask. He does offer like, hey, I'm thinking about, so yes, we were always talking about Geek by Night and writing, and we were well into our writing partnership at that point by the time we were bringing Geek by Night back. But he always, he never like drops the folder on your desk and being like, oh, we're doing this, by the way, you know. He does always invite you to it, but it does feel inevitable. I do remember feeling like, yeah, of course, like, yeah, we're going to bring the show back, because it just felt like all these ideas were bubbling up.
Mm-hmm.
Cass, tell me about your origin story with the reboot of Geek by Night. When were you approached, and what did that look like, and what were you thinking at the time?
I think it was in 2014 when you were assembling the writing staff, right?
Yeah. Probably
Late
like
2014?
near the end of 2014, but yeah, because the show came back in 2015, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, 2014.
And I, like Scott said, I have never listened to an episode of the old show. I still haven't. So he was just like, me and Nick are rebooting this thing that I did when I was in my early 20s, and we would like you to be part of the writing staff. And I think my first thought was like, why? Not because I didn't want to work with them, because like we'd been podcasting together already, but like I was not confident in my writing ability.
Dumb.
And
Wrong.
Thanks.
Wrong. Dumb. Stupid.
But I had collaborated previously, and I was like very trepidatious about doing that again, and it turns out that I just needed like a writing partner, like writing partners who like respected me as a person. So yeah, I don't know.
Because we had worked on that thing. That's how I knew you were a good writer. Was we worked on that thing, Temporal
web series.
Residence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was like a show, like a literal like live action,
like a
show.
YouTube show.
No,
thing.
it
We
was
were, like,
for it was for my college, like my local college, like
oh shit.
station.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I pitched it, and they were like, "Yeah, I mean, if you make it, we'll air it." Like, but I was like, "Wow, great! I'm making a TV show." And we tried to make the pilot over spring break, and after spring break, I was like, "Hey, we still have some shots to do," and all the actors were like, "Nah,
No, thank you.
no, thank
Yeah.
you," and I was like, "Oh." Okay. And then that was that. Nothing ever became of it. But we wrote that whole show, I think. Like the whole first season. We wrote the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I have all the
Yeah,
scripts up.
I haven't thought about that in
Up
a really
here.
long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I was really reluctant. And then I like came to it, and then I like got to know more of the cast and crew, and then I was just like, oh, okay. So like we're like all very passionate, and like we're like collaborating together instead of just like Scott is like telling people what to do, like Nick was saying. Like Scott, like I don't know, like it's I don't know. Turns out you need people who respect you, I guess.
Who would have thought?
Right?
Yeah. We've had in the past, it's funny that you should say that, Cass, that it's like Scott's not just telling people what to do, which is so funny because we did lose a few people because that is how they felt.
Yes.
Which is unfortunate. And I still regret that. I loved in the early season when it really felt like we were running like a real show, because we had a writer's room and like people were producing episodes and directing episodes, and it was a whole thing. And then stuff happens and people don't like the way things turn out, or they don't like the way that things were rewritten to sound more like the show. Not in a way that I was trying to disrespect them, but in a way that I felt like, well, I mean, the show needs to sound like the show. It has to be consistent.
Right.
And I don't even think we heavily rewrote those episodes, but I don't know. They had a lot of issues with that and a lot of issues with the process, but it was interesting because it was a learning process for all of us of like realizing, we could just do this ourselves. And ultimately we just were like, oh, we don't need the rest of these writers. We just need Cass.
Which is still like, even when we decided that, I was just like, what am I doing here? Like, why? But like over the course of like, you know, like the 4 years or whatever it took to break season 2, it like I don't know, I think the three of us work really well together, and like we complement each other's strengths, and like we both Scott and Nick like challenge me creatively in ways that like I don't know, like couldn't have foreseen, and I'm like really grateful for both of you. And yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. We just got to keep
Yeah.
this team thing going.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
Chelsi,
Hi.
tell us about your origin story in getting involved in a different capacity with Geek by Night.
So it was 2014. It was Halloween specifically. I remember I was at Scott's house for a Halloween party, and I was with Morgan Spencer, and Scott told us about wanting to reboot Geek by Night, and was, I don't know, just like kind of matter of fact, like, yeah, and I want to do this thing, and I really want you guys to be in it. And we were like, absolutely, that sounds amazing.
Am I crazy, or do I remember that you and Morgan listened to the old show, like while we were shooting Cupid Division, I think?
I started listening to it.
Okay.
And then pretty much right after you told us that you wanted us to be in a reboot, you like ripped it off the internet, and you were like, sorry, you can't listen to it. And I was like, what? But...
Yeah, I mean, you can hear me be really embarrassed by it, and Nick trying to desperately to console me in every episode of the Patreon, sort of like re-listen. Right. So yeah, I cringed into another universe every episode. But yeah, okay.
But yeah, it was. I mean, at that time, I had still only known Scott for a couple of months, but even still. Pretty instantaneously, Scott was my favorite person to work with, and I would have done literally anything he ever asked me to do, and I still do. And and at that time, that was just to be a voice actor, and I had very little VO experience, but I was like, well, I don't know, I trust Scott. Scott thinks that we can do it, so yeah, let's do it. And that was it's so funny to think of that, because that was way back when we were just like recording in your house, like in the little makeshift, like I was under a blanket recording, but it was fun. Yeah. And then along the way, I was asked to come on as a casting director, and that was after you had cast the first episode. And you kind of were like, I don't want to do this. Do you want to do it?
Yeah. I mean, because it was just a thing, I could see the writing on the wall where I was like, if I have to keep doing this every episode, like this show's never going to come out. Like it's going to take forever. Because it was really time consuming, because there were a lot less voice actors just a lot less voice actors like auditioning for this stuff in 2007 than there was in 2014. And putting out those open auditions in 2014, I was like, oh my God, this is so many people. And I needed help, definitely. So I was grateful to Chelsi for stepping in and agreeing to do that. Luckily, they were really great at it. So
which was surprising, because that was, voice acting was kind of one of those things where I was like, well, like I've done a lot of other acting, so I could probably do voice acting, but casting, I had zero experience, like whatsoever. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I love this show, and I'll do any, like, I would love to just have any part of it. And it ended up being my favorite thing to do. And over the past decade, it has always been my favorite thing to, even when I was, I had just started college then, and I was studying psychology, and I would take breaks to go work on Geek by Night because that's what I wanted to be doing instead. And 10 years later, that is what I do professionally, is work in casting. So it's wild to think of that transition, and it all just started because Scott was like, "Hey, you want to do this?"
Because I really don't want to. Also, credit where credit's due. I know we talk a lot about Tofty and with deservedly so, how much of the show's tone and everything comes from his score and like the sound of the show. But I think we don't talk enough about how the sound of the show comes from Chelsi. They know what this show is supposed to sound like and have since the beginning. And it's crazy to think about how different the show might sound if someone else was doing the casting. And Chelsi just nailed it. And it just feels so inevitable. Like, oh yeah, of course this is what the show is supposed to sound like. But like, no, that's them. That's Chelsi. That is finding these people, and it's a big part of the reason that I think the show works as well as it does, is because of how well they've cast all of these sort of like side characters and guest characters and everything. So it goes without saying a lot, because it's pretty distracting when you hear Tofty's score and you're like, yeah, wow, that's the show. But like, but yeah, I mean, even without the score, the show would still sound like the show because of Chelsi.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So let's talk about casting for a bit. Chelsi, how many characters / actors do you estimate that you have cast throughout the series of Geek by Night?
So I did a brief little running of numbers, and we have had almost 200 characters that I have cast.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Holy shit.
Yeah, it's like it comes in just under 200. Actually, it might be around 200, because I think some of those were like multiple people played them. But yeah, actors though, definitely fewer, just because there were definitely a handful of actors who really came through and saved my life so many times to play just a bunch of different roles. And like, I mean, there are some actors who played anywhere from like half a dozen to over a dozen characters. Like,
can you tell us about one or two?
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, Nicholas Andrew Louis is just incredible in every way, and not only plays Henry Swift, but has definitely come in and helped me out multiple times, where I'm just like, I don't know what to do with this. I can't find anybody to play it. I need to have it submitted tomorrow. Like, can you give me something? And he would just like come up with something cool. It would fit. It would sound great. And I'd be like, amazing. Mm-hmm. Same with like Warren Blackie and Nolan Tashin. Those three especially really came through and covered so many different characters. I think Warren probably the most. I think I counted 14 for him. Yeah. So there were just like, I don't know, there have been some that were just really fun for me in a different way, in the sense that I don't know, it was cool connections with people that I knew. Like, it was cool that ultimately I ended up casting both of the Beauchamps, Leslie Beauchamp and Brad Beauchamp.
As Atlas and David.
Yeah. Because I cast Leslie as Atlas years and years and years ago, because that was for Simon's episode in the first season. Mm-hmm. And fast forward like 5 years, maybe more, I think, was when I was casting David, and Brad auditioned, and I was like, hey, wait, this kind of works.
Keep it in the family.
Yeah. That's been fun, and they have a lot of fun with it too. That's just, yeah, a lot of great people.
You're also responsible for, casting like half of our enormous ensemble. And you know, you have Natalie Van Sistine, who is, has gone on to be like one of the lead voices on Spy Family, which
Yeah.
literally had a movie released in theaters with her voice. If you go see the dub, and she's amazing in that. And it's I've started watching that show now finally, and I'm just like, this show rules, and it's so cool hearing Natalie's voice come
Yeah.
out of an animated character. It's so
Mhm.
it's so fun. So that's really exciting, and obviously like Mark Allen Jr. and Jay, you cast Jay, and you cast so many people. And one, I don't know if you even know this or remember this, but I was plugging in the IMDb, and I had a revelation that I was like, whoa, holy shit. Did you know that you cast Sam Haft, the co-creator of Has Been Hotel, in our second episode, like your first episode you ever cast? He is in that.
I know
Wow.
exactly who you're talking about.
Yes, he is. He's the voice of the guy who leaves the scientist who leaves the room when Victor goes
Yeah.
in to
Yeah,
blow
yeah,
himself
yeah.
up. Yeah. And he is now the co-creator of Has Been Hotel.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So one of his random IMDb credits is this fucking show.
Oh my god, that's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. Wild.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Just goes to show you kind of how small this community is at the end of the day. It can feel so overwhelmingly large at times, because there's so many people like trying to make it in this industry, the voiceover industry, and they're all at different points in their lives when they come to us.
Yeah.
And then grow well beyond us. That happened to a few characters that we lost over time. And then we had people like Natalie, who stuck with us the entire time, which I now in retrospect, I'm like, why the fuck did you do that? Like, why didn't you leave? This is crazy. But like, the way she talks about it, she was like, I never get a chance to play this kind of character. Like, I'm usually like sexy, sultry girl. Like, it was cool getting to play like Valley Girl, like, bitchy sorority girl. Like, it was fun, and that's why she kept doing it.
Exactly, and that's very much a testament to the show. Like, it's great material. It's a lot of fun to work with, and also a great team to work with. Like, really good people.
I mean, yeah, that's all true, but also, like, again, she's never being cast as that kind of role, but you cast her as that role.
Mhm.
And so, credit where credit's due, Chels.
Thank you.
Is there a factor or trait or something that you look for in the almost 200 people that you added to the Geek by Night cast? Like, Scott is talking about how you helped define the sound of the show, and that's very true. Is there something about Geek by Night specifically as a project that you were able to kind of channel?
They're just like, I don't know. I feel like I understand. I feel like whenever I get a script, the incredible writing that these three do, I feel like I understand it so deeply that like it just makes sense in my brain. I feel like as soon as I read it, I know exactly what I'm looking for. But also, sometimes I have no idea, and sometimes somebody just shows up with a stellar audition, and I'm like, oh my god, this is incredible. Like, I never would have even thought of this. And sometimes they just nail it. Like when we did Ghost Story, I knew exactly the kind of voice I was looking for with Teddy, and then we got Joe Stofko, who crushed it and just knocked it out of the park and was like exactly what I wanted in that voice. And yeah, I don't know. There's just we get a lot of folks who think that because it is like a nerdy comic book show that they should be doing like a really animated character voice, and like that's not what we want, because like we just want normal sounding people. Like they belong in the world. And we've gotten really lucky to find a lot of voices who just kind of fit really well.
So, speaking of Jay, somebody that you cast, I want to talk about maybe the most significant moment of this series finale, which is Victor's sacrifice. And I don't know if I have a question because I'm really devastated about this. I absolutely love Victor. I love Victor's energy and what he meant to the team. But I want to ask the writers, like, when you are making a decision like that to kill a main character, what goes into that?
Nick, you directed his first story, Status Quo. I feel like my memory is that from inception, we were like, yeah, he's going to become the sort of like handler of these knuckleheads and eventually show them what it really means to be a hero by sacrificing himself ultimately. And that's why I think we wrote that whole thing about him being dissatisfied with the whole sacrifice thing, because he was like, no, I could have saved more people and I didn't. I feel like from the beginning, from inception, we were like, yeah, and eventually he has to die. I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly or not. Do you remember?
No, yeah, it feel when we came to the finale, it felt so inevitable. As sad as it was, I remember we said multiple times, like, we can't think of anything more respectful for this character than this ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we could have, it would have come out of the process, and he wouldn't have had to make the sacrifice. But it felt so connected to those early conversations in also such an organic, problem-solving way that all three of us are such big fans of, that it just felt inevitable. And we knew Jay was going to absolutely deliver on the performance aspect. And I think we also wanted to give him this opportunity to, get to do that as an actor and say goodbye to this character as well. And so it was the pride kind of exceeded the sadness, I think, for us as writers.
Yeah. When we wrote the finale, Jay was the first person who got to read it. We sent it to him.
Oh, wow.
We sent it to him before we sent it to the rest of the cast because we wanted him to know, hey, big thing happens with your character in this. Like, you should know this before we get to the table read and before anyone else reads it and maybe like blurts it out in the comments. Like, I didn't want him to find out that way. And I was like, yeah, so I think it's important that you read this. And he read it. And I'm sure he'll talk about this when he's on the cast episode. But, I just thought it was, you never want to kill a character, but I also felt like, well, the show's ending, so in a way, I'm killing all the characters, and so it's not that much different than everyone else. It's everyone's last episode, so it's not like he's losing out on anything. And I think that I wanted to earn that big time. I was looking at the outline that I wrote for this episode, which is let me see how many pages this thing is. It's a behemoth. It is, oh my God, 24 pages.
Just the outline?
Just the outline, yes. And the most detailed section is scene 3, which I feel like I need like a t-shirt that says I survived scene 3.
I survived scene 3.
But more on that later. But when we wrote the Victor stuff in the outline, I literally just wrote it. That's like the only part of the finale that I wrote, because I was like, no, I know exactly how I want this to feel. I know exactly the beat. I know what I want his last line to be. And everything. And so I wrote all of that into the outline. And one of the reasons why it's a 24-page outline is because of that, because I actually wrote that out. And I was like looking at the outline and reading, I was like, yeah, this didn't change much, actually. It might not have changed at all, actually, from this outline to the final episode. A lot of other things did, but that did not. And I think we had a very like well-defined idea of like, yeah, this is how he's going to go out, and this is what feels right and respectful for the character, while also giving all of the other characters something to react to, of like going back to our theme of like, why are we doing this? Are we doing this because we want to be doing this, or because we're afraid of like what comes after this if we choose to stop? And this gave them a reason to assess that, because they all really had to ask themselves that question of like, would we really be willing to do what he did? Because Jesus Christ, he's a real hero. Are we that? Are like, this is all fun and everything, but like, would we actually be willing to do that? And I think it's fun that, you know, surprising no one, it's Mindy and Simon are the ones that are like, yeah, no, totally. I mean, Simon's tried to kill himself like 7 times in this show.
He can't stop.
He just can't stop trying to die. But yeah, and I just think it's like cute irony that like of all of the underdogs, Mindy is the one that's like, no, I'm gonna keep doing this. I found that whole thing inspiring. This is what I've been missing from my life, is this kind of purpose. But yeah, he inspires everybody in very different ways, and I think we all just kind of realize like, oh yeah, like that's a really cool way to kill off a character, is to use it in this way. And it's the reason why it happens halfway through the episode, because it's really his sacrifice is really just the beginning of, you know, what the result of that is. But it made a lot of sense to us, and it's also the reason why we trapped him in that world for so long, because I was like, at the time I remember saying like, yeah, and then he could be trapped in there for like decades from his perspective, but it's like, great, it's actually a really positive thing. It's like heaven in there. And it's like, you know, we don't know if there's an afterlife in our world or whatever, you know, but the fact of the matter is like, he already lived in heaven, and then he got his one wish, which was to see his friends again. And so when he sacrifices himself, it's knowing that like, there might not be anything on the other side of this, but I already got my happy ending. So it's all been gravy, you know,
I'm going to cry again.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's, I'm really proud of how all of that turned out. And yeah, Jay absolutely crushed it. So,
there's a really beautiful moment after Victor's death where we get to hear a snippet of his audio logs from when he was away. And that's a moment that on multiple listen throughs really got me. And I was curious, which one of you wrote that monologue? Was that in the outline, or was that something that came later?
Nick did a really good first draft, and then I made it hurt more.
I
think
I told you to do
Good
that.
job. Good work.
Yes.
Because if I'm not mistaken, I was like reading it, and I was like, this is really good, but it doesn't hurt enough. So I literally told Cass, like, please make this hurt more. And you were like,
Yeah.
What? Okay.
Well, okay. And because I remember I was working on NaNoWriMo at the time when we were doing like the rewrites. So I counted some of my word count, like working on some of these scenes for the finale. And that month, I think like a week before I was working on Victor's video log, his audio log, one of my cousins passed away suddenly. So I was like working through a lot of that, which is why it hurts so much. But I'm really proud of that. That was that scene in particular, like, made me cry while I was writing it. So it's very gratifying to hear that like it lands emotionally with the people who are listening to it.
Yeah. I think the thing that we talked about when we were breaking the episode, or maybe did we talk about it? Or maybe I just referenced it in the outline or something when I got to it. I don't remember. But the big thing that that I knew that we would both be able to immediately like, oh right, yeah, that was the end of, I think the episode is called Hero, in Angel. The episode where what's his name dies, and you get the last scene where they're rewatching his commercial that he shot, and they're like, and he's like, "Is that it? Am I done?" And then you cut to credits, and they're like, and everybody cries. And I was like, that was kind of the feeling. It was like that I wanted to recreate, but I wanted it to be less like ironic sad and more like, oh, I'm really sad because I'm happy because he didn't lose out on anything. He got everything that he wanted.
And I remember when we were talking about Victor in the program too, like we kept talking about like season 6 of Buffy, where she like comes back, like they bring her back, and instead of like it being like, because it is still kind of tragic, but like instead of like playing up the tragedy of that with Victor, like playing up like that's why he's like Zen, like that's why he's like he's earned it at this point.
Yeah. I think he got to be in there a lot longer than Buffy did.
Yes,
also.
yeah.
But yeah, anything about that stuff that you remember, Nick, working on the Victor stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a line that got cut and rightly so, like, we didn't need it, but it still sticks with me. I still remember it because it's the only time, it's like when I cried. It's like the part that where I hit that wall when writing this. And Victor says, you don't miss anything like you miss people. And when he said it, I stopped writing because I was like, oh, that's true. And it was like, it suddenly became real. Like, that is kind of what I'm going to miss most about this experience, this process. It's this combination of the people that we were working with. And so it's always interesting as a writer when a character is able to say something that you didn't know was true until they say it. And I think it all speaks to our affection for what Jay has been able to bring to the character and like Victor as a character.
Yeah.
When you're writing really, really emotional content like that, is that difficult, or is it something that you think the characters can kind of inform in a way that it isn't hard for you to put onto the page?
I think I have to be in the right headspace for it. Because oftentimes I think like it's easier for me to have these characters kind of dealing with this, and then it's like therapy, right? Like I'm these characters that I'm like deeply invested in but also removed from are going through similar things, and then like through that, like I'm bringing my experience, and like that's kind of how I write. So I think the most difficult part for me is arriving at the right headspace in order to like have that conversation with these characters, you know?
Yeah.
Personally, I'm on the cusp of crying at any moment, so it comes pretty easily to me. I very much like wear my emotions on my sleeve, and I can very quickly get to an emotional place that, I'll be perfectly honest, makes writing it easier in a lot of ways, because I'm feeling the emotions I want the audience to feel. And I think that happened. I mean, that just happened multiple times, making this episode, writing this episode, and then definitely editing it, and directing it. But yeah, it's yeah, I wouldn't say harder. I would say easier. And it's certainly cathartic. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then when you're in the thick of it, I remember feeling so good that I was like just getting it done and like, oh, I'm doing it. Yeah. That's what we were planning on. Cool. And like, I'll process it later or, you know, I do kind of enter workman mode where it's like, okay, time to do this. And I guess in a weird way, kind of goes back to I went to drama school in college. And so you do learn how to be like, okay, time to pull these emotions out and then put them back when you're done using them. And it's just, but then it's like, I love how Cass writes, and I love how
Oh, thank you.
they feel what they write and they live what they're writing. And I find that so brave. And I think it's why they're the moments of the show that really have their energy to it. It's some of my favorite moments of the show.
You're going to make me cry.
So at the end of this episode, there is a little epilogue or button or stinger where we see Jeff and Elliot pitching their idea for a comic book series to a publisher played by our very own Scott Carelli.
My one cameo in the show. Uncredited.
Oh,
I say proudly.
so selfless. Can you tell me about that scene just in general? Like, where did the idea come from? And is that a scene that you, was it something that came late in the game in terms of the writing process, or was it something that you always envisioned doing something like that?
There was a version of the scene in the original script that was them pitching it to the comic book publisher, but the gag at the end was just about like, man, this is a weird show to try to. This was so hard to market the show, and the title is weird, and it doesn't make any sense, and so it was basically the publisher being like, we got to do something about the title because it doesn't make any sense, and also like I don't really know how to pitch the show or this comic book and whatever, and tried to simplify it by being like it's the Big Bang Theory with superpowers, and Gibson,
and we know how you feel about that.
Yeah, and Gibson and Elliot being really offended. And that was that, and I never liked it. I was never satisfied. I was like, but the show needs to be done. It was kind of how I felt. And so, that was December of 2022 when we finished that script. And these last 3 episodes we wrote very quickly, all things considered. Especially with this one being as long as it is. Like these last episodes, I mean, it was just like everything just kind of fell into place like very quickly and easily. And we're like, wow, I wish the rest of the show had been this easy. But I was like, okay, we got to get this out. And so we got it out, but I didn't like that last scene, but I was banging my head against the wall trying to figure out like, what the hell? I don't know what the scene is otherwise. Like, we need the scene because we didn't want to end on the VO and we needed to reveal what Elliot and Gibson were working on, but I did not like the scene. And then in March of this year, I messaged Nick and Cass and I was like, oh my God, we have like a hole in our plot. And I explained it. And they were both like, shut the fuck up. Shut up.
Yeah.
Shut up.
No, the amount
Stop
of like anxiety,
talking.
my heart rate like spiked. I was
You're
like,
like,
what are you talking about?
We don't need to do anything. Shut the fuck up. Don't tell anyone. Keep it to yourself. And I was like, well, what if I rewrote the last scene and we like just sort of like call it out? And they were like, no, unnecessary. We don't need it. It's fine. Leave it alone. Just don't do anything. And I was like, well, fuck you guys. I'm going to do it anyway. And I went and I wrote the scene. And then like, I think like the next day I just like dropped the scene in and they were both like, okay, that's pretty good. All right. We have to admit that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then that was that. And I knew as soon as I had written it, I was like, there it is. Oh my God, I feel so much better. Like this is the last scene in the show. This feels so much better. Because it felt like it was the last scene just felt too much like a repetitive joke to like Nick's absolutely stellar punching a brick wall for 15 years joke.
God. Incredible.
Which is just so good. And I was like, yeah, he says everything we say in this last scene, but in one line. I was like, we don't, all of this old version of the scene I don't need. And that's why I think it never felt right. And I also just didn't like ending on like on a reference to a show that, was over it had its series finale for like years, and it just felt like a very dated reference, and I was like, I don't like this. So rewriting the scene, and dropping that in, and both Cass and Nick being like, yeah, that's okay, that actually is pretty good, was a big relief. And I immediately sent it to Matt and Chris to re-record. I think it's definitely the last thing that Matt recorded for the show. Chris had one other thing because he forgot some lines that he had to record. But in general, like, yeah, this was like kind of like the last thing that it was certainly the last thing I ever wrote for the show. I think the last thing Nick ever wrote for the show was Max's like advertisement for making it weird. That we had on the Beyond like a few months ago. Yeah.
Last thing I ever wrote for the show. Last time I ever wrote for Max Carmichael.
Yeah. But I'm really proud of how it turned out, and it just sort of like ties back into kind of like thematically everything that we were doing in the denouement, like the back half of the show, which was all about sort of the fact that, like, yes, the show is ending, but in many ways we're never going to see those adventures, but the world lives on. And that was what that was about, was just like, oh, there's a lot more shenanigans that are going to happen that we're never going to see. And that was very important to me, to be a part of this, where it felt very, I hope it feels very final, but I wanted there to still be life in all of these characters, and adventures that you could think of. I wanted to leave the audience being like, oh man, I really wish I could see more of that. Or in Nick's case, I wish I could write a sorority of supervillains spin-off series. And instead, I guess it'll have to be fanfic.
It's my bounty law.
Yeah, like, I wanted it to feel like the world was going to keep going, and it felt so funny to me to end on them being like, oh shit, we didn't think of that. The idea that there's going to be a whole other set of characters walking around is very funny to me. So yeah, there you go. Very, very late in the game. Very late in the game that scene was written.
And there's, as you mentioned, there are some other threads in the episode that don't necessarily get as neatly tied up as others. We have Madison's super sorority. We have the last man accepting a new political view and continuing his influence over people.
The super school.
Was it?
Super school.
And the super school, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask, obviously these characters are ones that people would like to see more of. Obviously, there are stories that could be set up to be explored further in the future. Have you considered the idea of sequels or spin-offs?
No.
Okay.
No. I look, I would say never, but the requirements I would have in order to do that would be, I would have to pay everyone a full salary, including myself. And it would have to be a full-time job. That would be the only way that I would ever do it again. It's too much work. And I'm glad that we reached the end and we got to this, but like, when I say this episode almost killed me, like, I mean it. I mean it. This was tough, especially scene 3, which is the longest scene in the show.
Can you tell us about surviving scene 3?
It was literally 2 months. 2 months of me waking up at 6 a.m., getting coffee, sitting in front of the computer until I had to go take a shower to go to work. By 9. Get to work all day, come home, cook dinner, finish dinner, go back and sit in front of my computer until midnight, and then waking up the next morning and doing it again. 8 weeks of doing that just to finish scene 3. That's not to say with the rest of the episode. The rest of the episode, I mean, the whole thing I think took me about 4 months all in to complete, but scene 3 was 2 of those 4 months. It was nuts. And it really just like, I had to get real zen about it and just like, I'm not going to look at the end of the tunnel. I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to chug along. If I can get like, you know, a little, you know, a little section done today, like great. If it's just 3 lines because I'm spending most of my time trying to like figure out the way I want a sound effect to sound like, so be it. But like, I was not willing to compromise on this being the best episode we had ever done. And that resulted in me working my ass off. I was very, very dedicated to getting this one exactly the way that I wanted it. And it was hard. It was really hard. And scene 3 was like just an endless, I don't want to say a slog because it does like it shifts gears so many times that it really does feel like, because the thing is scene 3 by itself has 3 acts. It's an entire like 3-act story in one scene. And yeah, and that was all done in one. I think the whole thing ends up being like 38 minutes or 39 minutes long or something like that.
Longer than most of our episodes.
Yeah. It was a lot. And I just remember I messaged them after I was done with scene 3. Because after I was done with scene 3, I also had to like, I messaged Nick and I was like, can you please just listen to this? I don't know. My brain is in another universe. I don't know if this is done or not. Can you please listen to it and tell me if I'm done? And so he listened to it and he was like, yeah, good job, man. Like you did it really, that's amazing. Like you really did it. And I was like, oh, thank God. But yeah, I think I told them like the next day I started working on scene 4 and I was like, I'm working on scene 4 today. I feel insane because I'm not in scene 3 anymore.
Because in the script, that's like, it is over 30 pages, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's like, I think it's like page 45 or something like that before it shifts to scene 4. Yeah, but there was no other way. Like that's the thing is like when we were breaking it, we tried so many ways to figure out like
to break it up
into different scenes, and it's like all of this feels forced, and like why would they go somewhere else? It doesn't make any sense. It would all just happen right here. Nothing else made sense, unfortunately. And so it is what it is, and we just stayed in that one scene, and it was rough. And it was funny because like I'm sure Tofty is going to talk about it. I'm talking about scoring that, which was, you know, a big pain in the ass for him as well, because he was like, yeah, I was writing like one piece of music for this whole like 40-minute sequence essentially. And you know, I think it took him, I don't know, like maybe a week to do that scene. And he was like, wow, like that's the longest I've ever spent on a scene. I was like, buddy, I don't want to devalue your work. You did an amazing job, but man. So anyway, I'm very proud of how it turned out, but whoo boy. And if you looked at it, if you just opened that sequence and looked at it, you would be like, what? How did he? What?
Yeah,
it's insane. I mean, Nick saw it. I'm sure he can contest to like being like, yeah, that's the most insane thing I've ever looked at.
It's like a cipher.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. I think it's like there's like 50 tracks or something. Like, yeah, 50 audio tracks, like all the way down. What? And yeah, I know. Yeah,
I would have opened that and like started crying.
Yeah, my heart's racing thinking about it.
Yeah. 50. I think it was like 50 tracks. Most scenes are like 10 tracks, something like that. This was like 50. It was crazy. And then on top of that, I was also having to like, because some things would be it would have made it so much further. Like it would probably be 100 tracks if I didn't pre-design some stuff in a separate thing, sound effects, so that I could just bring in the final product, just to like keep it a little tighter and more manageable. But man, whoo boy. Yeah. I'm exhausted just thinking about it.
Well done, man.
So I want to expand this next question a little bit. I was originally going to ask a little bit about writing and sort of what you took as writers from working on the show, but I want to expand it to creativity in general, because across all of my guests in the room right now, we have producers, writers, directors, voice actors, casting directors, a lot of different hats being worn here. So I want to ask the bigger question to everybody in the room. How has Geek by Night made you a better creative, or what lessons in creating art do you take away from your time on Geek by Night?
Such a big question.
Yeah.
I think I've learned a lot about, when going back to bringing the writer's room together and learning kind of the language, the production language of the show in that first season, and then kind of learning from our mistakes every time we would start a new kind of chunk of the show. I learned a lot about communication and going back to the brain trust, the three of us sort of learning how to communicate with people you're collaborating with and respecting how they work and the speed that they work at, and like what they kind of need and what they need from you specifically and what they don't need. And it's I can't imagine, it's so much emotional work that the three of us have done with each other just kind of accidentally while working on this thing that we like. And when I think about just starting from scratch with someone, it's kind of a really daunting idea.
Mm-hmm. I think all in all, I'm walking away from this experience with, like, not to downplay the collaboration aspect, because I cannot imagine like not collaborating with these two, but also like I'm more confident in like myself and like what my strengths are and like what I'm interested in and how that contributes, so that's really cool to like gain from this from like this decade of this show.
I definitely feel very similar. Like, I started as a voice actor and kind of thought that an actor was all I would ever be or want to be, and I learned so much more about the production aspect, and not even just in casting, but I didn't know that I would like this aspect so much more than I ever would have imagined. And I, not just that I like it, but that I'm good at it, and that's a really good feeling. And honestly, I don't know. I feel like so much of who I am as a creative outside of Geek by Night is because of Geek by Night. Like, this is kind of where, I don't know, I got to play and learn and do so in a space that I trust the people that I'm with, and that I felt like I could do that, and that even if I messed up, like, people would have my back, and I'm always very appreciative of that. I like the way that we all work together and the way we all encourage each other.
I mean, I learned, a lot like Cass. I learned about, like, the things that I value in story and in creativity, and what feels like me as a writer, or the kinds of things that I'm interested in and the kinds of things that I'm not interested in, all sort of stem from working on this show. I think I'm a very confident writer at this point, and that's because I work with two people who made me better, and work with a cast who made me want to be better, and it's yeah, I've just gotten so much out of this process. On top of everything else, I mean, just like even beyond the creativity of it all, this show has taught me like the kind of leader I want to be, which is a largely empathetic one, but one that like doesn't want to just give people work to do, but to give them things that will make them grow and develop. And that's become like very important to me as like a core value. And I just think that I've worked with a lot of people, and not everybody wants to be challenged, and the ones that do stand out to me. And those are the ones that I reward with more things, more responsibilities, and more, not in like a like shoveling shit onto them kind of way, but like just in a way of like, oh, I think you might be really good at this part, or maybe you should try doing this. Like asking Chelsi and Cass to direct episodes, or Chelsi to become our casting director. All of that stuff. That is just really important to me, because I knew that like I couldn't pay anybody with this. And I was like, if I can't pay you, the least I can do is like, if you're showing up every time, is to like try to help you take something out of this that you can bring somewhere else. And I'm so happy that Chelsi got into casting, because that made me feel like, okay, like I couldn't pay them, but at least I may have like helped get them a career, and that's fun. And this show got me a career. I'm a voiceover agent because of this.
Yep.
And I get to represent people like Mark and Nick and Natalie. And it's been really, it's not something that I ever saw for myself. But when I think about how important it is to me to help other people and be the kind of leader or collaborator that I wish for myself, I've just realized that like being an agent is like a really cool thing, because I get to help people get the things that they wanted, like, I don't know. It all just feels like this weird inevitable thing that doesn't really make any sense, but it also does. It's crazy. I don't know. This whole process has been incredible, and I'm excited for us to work on something else together that will not be a podcast. I can tell you that much. Unless we sell something to, like, I don't know, one of the big podcast networks, and they make it our full-time job. I don't think it's going to be a podcast. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's very little money in podcasts. There's a whole scene about it in our finale.
Well, I do want to ask, before we get to some sort of like wrap-up questions, do the three of you have plans, or at least hopes, to collaborate as a writing team again?
I hope so.
Yeah. There's one thing I know. I know there's a few things that Cass and I have tossed around together, like just us, and there's certainly stuff that Nick and I have tossed around together, just us. But there is one project that the three of us really want to do together. And we just got to figure out what that looks like and when we can do it. But it's definitely something that we've been excited about for like years at this point. When we were starting on season 2 and we thought we were near the end of Geek By Night, we were like, and then this will be the next thing we do. And it's, 4 years later, we haven't even started that thing. So we'll see what happens. But I would love to work on something, especially that, but anything with these two. So, yeah.
So I've got a few questions for everybody. It's very much like a go around the table type of thing. And I'm going to also be asking these questions to cast members and everybody else I'll be interviewing on these last few Beyond Geek by Night episodes. So my first question is, What moment in the story of Geek by Night defines the show for you? Or maybe it feels like a little microcosm of the show, or feels like if you wanted somebody to know what the show was like, they would listen to this little moment.
A moment is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I don't know. Maybe this is controversial just because of the nature of the episode, but I would almost say Under the Bridge is the episode that I would say, like, oh, if you want to know what this show is all about, listen to Under the Bridge, because it's about geek culture. It's about like toxic geek culture. And it's also about us not pulling our punches in terms of, no, we're going to start this episode and the character we're following is a total prick. And then he's going to become a little better by the end. And that is what this show is about giving people second chances. I mean, you see it across the denouement of like, people deserve second chances, even in ways that you might not expect. And you know, don't write off everybody. Some people should be written off, but you know, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, I think by the time you get to the end of this, the only character in the entire show that ends the show like just as shitty as they started was Billy. That's it. He's the only one. Because even the Ire finds a way to use his stupid powers, which, big reveal, he's had superpowers this whole time. You know, his superpowers in a way that is like weirdly positive. Billy's the only one who's just like a shitty little asshole.
Billy's arguably gotten worse as the show.
It's true. So true. So I would say Under the Bridge for me is sort of like the most, I think, definitive episode of the show. If you've never listened to the show before, I would say Under the Bridge. But you have to get through Gibson saying some really heinous stuff, and you know, having the media literacy to know that he's probably going to change before the show is the episode is over. Some people don't have that, unfortunately, but that's another story entirely. What about you guys?
I don't know. I think part of the identity of this show is that it's hard to kind of pin down. It's hard to like categorize it. You know, because it's like it's so many different things. But I guess for like the vibe generally, probably like the holiday special.
Oh, good. That's a good pull.
Because it's it like it's kind of like all of the little microcosms in like one little package, you know?
I think I'm gonna first one is the blind spot, where the kind of whole like jailbreak sequence with the overachievers and Lorelai. To me, I think that's the show having the most fun. And like it's all of us just kind of jamming and having fun, like really reveling in each other's like voices and our strengths, and like the music's really fun in that moment, and like our writing, we're having fun with these characters. And it's also another key moment of the show, which is like in that moment, hero and villain are kind of up in the air in a really fun way. Of like, I'm really rooting for like Lorelai and the overachievers, and I'm not really thinking about Madison and Cosmo and Janet as villains or whatever. And that becomes kind of a key component of the show. Is very everyone kind of, it's like everybody get in here energy. I also just want to highlight making it weird, just because I think that's us at our height. That's like us at our most like audacious and confident in like the listeners sticking with us, confident in ourselves pulling that off, you know?
I love the idea of people stumbling across the show later and then like being like, oh yeah, okay, this is pretty good, and then like I'm just like, just the comparison to like our first episode compared to like making it weird. You're like, what the hell is this show? what is this? It's crazy. I do want to. I found some material from the original season 2 when it was going to be ongoing. And I wanted to talk through a few things. So because we had talked about previously about like episodes that we had lost, by deciding to wrap up the show. And so one of the episodes that we actually wrote, and I pulled this up, and this was before Cass was one of the main writers and executive producers of the show. So I think these are all just me and Nick. But Nick, I pulled this up, and there are 4 completed scripts that we just never produced because we moved on.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like 4, yeah, I know. 4 different sort of like we tried to start here or whatever. One of those is only like 4 pages because I think we just started, and then we were like, nope, not feeling it. Let's start over. But yeah. So those were like 2 of those were from the original finale, which was of season 1, which was not going to be the holiday special. It was going to be this sort of like arc of a story that was going to be, I think it was like, I want to say it was like 6 parts, and the first part was going to be the Gretchen centric episode that we got, and then it was going to go into like a 4-part story and then an epilogue. So like that was going to be, it was called like Another Life, I think was what it was originally called. Yeah, Another Life, and there was a prologue, which was the Gretchen episode, and then it was like 4 parts of Another Life finale, and then the Another Life epilogue. And we wrote like 2 of those scripts, 2 of the 4, and even did a table read of one of them, and then we were like, no, we're gonna end the show instead. And so we had to do something else. But then when we were breaking what season 2 would look like, the first episode was going to be an episode called Comfort Zones, and that was actually going to be the episode where Victor dies.
Wow.
Yeah, because like I said, he was always we always knew that's where he was gonna go. Especially this late in the game. And it was gonna inspire like them getting Victor out of the program, and then him having to sacrifice himself to stop the grid from exploding. All of that was this early on. And it was the event that sort of like put the underdogs for the first time in the public eye, was the idea. But like they become part of the public eye as like superheroes at the same time that their mentor is gone. And so it was going to be a lot about that. Some character-centric episodes we had was Gibson's Greatest Hits, which was about old tweets resurfacing and threatening Gibson's future with the underdogs. And then the team finally has to decide between the shop and committing to being heroes full time. We had, I think we talked about this for Gwen the Bell Tolls, which is Gwen being forced to attend her high school reunion and reconnects with her high school boyfriend, who she abandoned rather than tell the truth when she realized she was gay. And we have Keeping Up with the Gibsons, which was going to be, I think if I remember correctly, we talked about this being like, we get to learn more about like the Gibson family and like meet their parents and everything.
Would have been so fun to cast.
Yeah. And we have, I have written down Wonder Twin villains. I don't even know what that means.
Like an evil Jeff and Mindy. Like they would have rivals.
Oh, that's right. Yes, you're right. I remember
another
that
pair
now.
of siblings. Like,
yeah. Also, guys, I forgot about this, but like, so Lorelai was still going to lose everything, but she wasn't going to go to prison originally, and instead she was just going to be poor, and she has to become roommates with Gwen.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and we wrote that. Those are in those scripts where Lorelai like moves in with Gwen for a while, and it doesn't go well. But yeah, that was a thing. Also, Gwen begins a secret tryst with a masked vigilante. That was going to be a thing. I forget who that was going to end up being, but
Maybe
we talked.
Anita?
I think it was Anita.
Was it Anita? Okay. Interesting. In any event, we wrote Charlie-centric episode. Check. Got that one done.
That's one.
We have one where Simon was going to overcorrect after like kind of like not being a good boyfriend to Mindy. He was going to overcorrect and be like a little too attentive, which was going to be, kind of a typical Simon stuff in terms of like doing too much. There was going to be an episode we were calling Graduation Day, in which Mindy was going to graduate from college, but Gretchen accidentally creates a time loop, which makes her relive her last night in college over and over and over. So while we did do the Gretchen makes a time loop thing in the holiday special, we didn't do it where she accidentally trapped Mindy in a time loop. But I think that's fun. And we had Once in Future Simon. Simon's told by his future self that he fucked everything up and he has to fix it. And then season 3, we said we have season 3 Supermax. So that was going to happen in season 3 apparently. But yeah, so that was fun to revisit. I was looking at this and I was like, oh yeah, all of this stuff. I remember this. And we also wrote Elliot is without purpose. And I was like, LOL.
See?
Always part of the plan. See?
Doomed.
Yeah. Anyway. But yeah. What was the question?
Trying to find distill the show down to like an episode or a scene or a moment that we feel is like characteristic of the show. Like,
what about you,
do have
Chelsea?
one?
Oh, so what's funny is I actually probably also would have said the holiday special.
Nice.
But I will I was thinking about it, and it's 2 moments for me, and that is when they are playing the game, both in the first episode and then when we get to hear them
playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
The music in particular for whenever they're playing the game is just like what sticks in my brain so often when it comes to Geek by Night, and like it's so like hearing the camaraderie between them and like the goofiness of it too. Like it feels very fun. It feels very, I don't know. I have always really enjoyed those 2 scenes and seeing like the full circle of it kind of. Yeah.
Nice.
I have a question, because there's little a few things in the finale that I just want to like poke at a little bit. One is that like I don't know why I did this, or why, I don't even know if I discussed this with Cass and Nick, but like I was pretty adamant when I was writing the outline and then later like my draft of the script that I wanted to reference every single episode that we ever did in the show in the finale, and I got them all. They're all in there. There's a reference to every single episode. If you listen back, which is really fun. I really wanted it to feel like this had all been leading to this point by having all those references. And I don't even think any of them are forced, which is really nice. They all felt very natural. But I was very proud of that. But in terms of like you mentioned, like the spin-offs and sequels and how like we leave a lot of things open. There's a lot of hints about what their lives look like in the future. And future adventures and things like that. And I'm just curious how many of them were caught by everybody. There's one in particular that I'm dying to know if Chelsi caught. because it's a Gretchen related thing. And I don't know if they caught it.
Me. So I have two thoughts.
Okay.
One, either like with the super school, like running things there.
Sure.
But also, I'm dating someone.
You sure are.
Yeah.
They met someone.
I met
Yeah.
someone.
And where do they work?
Library?
Museum.
No. Where
Museum.
am I? Huh? Museum. Yes.
Museum. Yes. Yeah. They work at a museum. And one of the things that we wrote in the sorority of supervillains scene was that Dr. Ninja has two
degrees.
2 degrees,
2 doctorates.
one of which is in anthropology.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Oh
dating.
my God.
Yeah, they're dating. And they don't know it. They don't know that they're dating, but they are dating.
I didn't know that. That
so
rules.
great.
Yeah. So that was like a little secret that we put in to be
Oh my
like,
God, I
if
love
anyone
that.
notices this would be a really fun thing. But yeah, Gretchen is totally dating Dr. Ninja's secret identity.
That's incredible. I love it.
So that was pretty proud of that one. But there's a few other ones too that I just I don't know. I wanted it to really feel like the show's going to keep going even though you're not watching it. And some of those things are like pretty obvious, like where the characters end up, and then there's other little hints of things like that Dr. Ninja thing. So yeah.
I had the thought the other day of, I was listening to the finale and there's this line where Gwen has like, okay, but like the next 3 hires we get have to be femme, like no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, it'd be funny if like for some reason Janet ended up working at the shop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like she needed a job or needed to get away from Mindy and Simon, and like what would that look like? And I hope the listeners are doing the same thing. I hope they are kind of like noodling and be like, oh, what if this happened, or what if they met up?
Yeah.
And that was part of. I realize now that's why I wanted to ask about sequels and spinoffs. Is it wasn't necessarily like I think there are specific spinoffs or sequels set up. It's that I love these characters and I love that we get these little nuggets of what direction they are heading in, and I like that it feels like an ending in the sense that like the story that we know is complete and our characters grew in a certain way, but it really does feel like we could, conjecture and talk about what is going to be next for everybody. And I think that just turned into this excitement of like everything nowadays is a story that just never ends.
Right.
Everything gets 11 sequels and is just constant and forever.
Yeah.
And this is me in the denial phase of my grief.
Well, because with Mindy, it's like Mindy is now like, oh my God, that's Dr. Ninja, who I guess I had a relationship with in another universe. What if moving in with Simon has like unexpected, like, oh wait, this relationship has always been smooth sailing, no issues, but now all of a sudden there are, and now there's this cool, sexy, weird person that I see sometimes in my other life, and like Gretchen, Mindy, Dr. Ninja triangle. Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
A triad.
Triad.
A thruple. I also, there's something so symbolic for me in the idea of like the next generation of superheroes and like the super school with that. And like part of that was like I really enjoyed Lyric Beatty, who played the teen, the new fiery Danny. That's the name. There's like Nick said, like I am now the same age that Scott was when we started this show, and the idea of like the next generation of the superheroes and of Geeks by Night. Yeah, I don't know. I am also in my denial, and I never want the show to end. But it's like a handing of the torch.
Or a phantom limb.
Any other thoughts or tidbits about this final episode before we get to the last question?
I had this thought earlier when we were talking about where everyone ended up and how some people characters like Mindy and Simon are inspired by Victor's sacrifice, and really that puts them in overdrive. And they're like, no, I want to live this crazy life where I'm going to be making all these sacrifices to maybe living a normal life, but like, I need this, I want this. And other characters like Gwen or Gretchen, like everyone gets to find out what they want the next part of their lives to be. And it reminds me just so much of the people that I've knew when I was a young person, like being an actor, going to drama school, like being in like the entertainment industry, seeing all of my friends now that we're getting a little older, kind of like, well, you know what? I don't want this lifestyle. So I'm going to like find something else. And like, this is now what I need, or this is, whereas some of my friends are like, oh no, I understand now that to reach a certain level of success, I have to make these crazy sacrifices, and I'm going to do that. And it's added this whole new layer to using superpowers as like a metaphor for like adulthood or success or many different things.
Mm-hmm. Cass, final thoughts?
I don't know. It feels like I'm very content with this show, like where we ended and how it turned out. I'm very proud of that. And like, I feel like I've been just through the various like parts of the production process, like I feel like I've been saying goodbye to this show for like the past 2 years. So now that it's finally like over, like capital O over, like it feels like surreal.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not in the denial, but it is kind of like Scott messaged me and Nick a couple days ago, and is just like, he's just trying to exist, but he feels like he has something to do on Geek by Night, like something to finish, but it's done. And that's kind of where I'm at. Like I don't know. And I'm like trying to just exist in this weird little like liminal space between like creative endeavors, like kind of just, I don't know. It's a weird spot. I don't really know how to like really describe it, other than like it feels kind of like a liminal space in that part of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Especially too, because it didn't just end, it was completed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't something that was abandoned, or it wasn't something that got too difficult. And it did get difficult, but it was rounded out and it was completed. And that's a feeling that a lot of us don't really get, especially as creatives. Like, it is hard to get to the very end of something.
Mm-hmm.
I think our brains just aren't wired for handling that feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think just like enjoying that we've completed it on our terms is like kind of where.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just very proud of this final episode, and I think it's the best thing that we've ever done on the show. And I hope that everyone listening, you don't have to agree that it's the best episode we've ever done, but I hope you all agree that it's a satisfying conclusion and that you feel good about it. And if there's any sense of like longing, of wanting more, just know that like that's on purpose. I guess like we wanted you to leave wanting more. Like that's kind of, I feel like the best shows end that way. But I hope that everything just felt as surprising as it did inevitable. And I hope you missed the show, but I hope you don't feel like we missed anything, if that makes sense. So yeah, we tried really hard to make this thing as satisfying as possible, and I hope we succeeded. Because I think we all came to this as like fans first of this thing. Even though it's a thing that we made together, we were all just like such big fans of like the characters and this story and this world that like, I think it was really important to all of us just as fans of, because if we didn't like this show, we wouldn't still be doing it. And listeners or no listeners, I don't think we would still be doing it. And so, you know, I think when we came to end it, we really just thought of it from the perspective of like, well, what do we want? Because at the end of the day, we're the ones making it. We're the ones that are going to have to live with this as we end this show over the period of 2 years, or if you go all the way back to 2020, I mean, like 4 years. So it's, you know, I think that was like, this is the end of the show that I always wanted to see. I think everybody ends in a place that like is exactly where I would have wanted them to end. And I think the plot pulls together exactly the way that I'm just so proud of it. And it was just such a relief writing this finale, and it being one of the easiest episodes we ever wrote, because it just all felt so inevitable and easy because we had done the work, the really hard work leading up to it. And it was just very satisfying to get to the end and realizing like, oh, we did it. And then the fact that like pushing this thing all the way through production, getting the edit done, getting the score back, figuring all of that out and how that all sounded. I mean, it was just, you know, I was really, really focused on each individual problem as I went along. But once I got to the point where I had to like listen down to the whole episode, because it was like, we think this is the final edit, and I'm listening down to the final episode, it was just like, wow, we did it. Holy shit. And that was like the first time that I was like, oh my God, like it's over. Like we did it. We actually did it. That is the episode that we imagined in our head when we were writing it, and conceiving it. And I'm so proud of us, and everybody that worked on this. And I hope that everyone finds this as satisfying, I think, as we do. And I just hope that, you know, we'll find out, I guess, next time when you guys talk to the cast, which I'm not going to be a part of, which will be, I think, the first Beyond that I won't be on.
I think so.
Yeah. But I wanted the cast to have time just to talk about the show without me around. I just wanted them to have that freedom. And so I'm excited to hear that episode and see how they all feel about the ending. But I couldn't be prouder of it. I just think I'm just so happy that it exists and that we got here and we succeeded in finally we finally succeeded in setting out what we had planned to do, which is reach this point where we explain what the title of the fucking show is. That's what this was all about. So anyway, so yeah, I would just say thanks so much for listening, everybody. It means the world if you got this far in the show. Like, it's just so cool that you're still around, still listening, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the end of everyone's journey as much as we enjoyed making it.
I think that's as good a way as any to close us out today. I want to say thank you again to all of my guests that are here with me today, Scott, Cass, Nick, and Chelsi, for joining me today. And thank you to all of you, the fans, the underdogs, for listening, not just today, but over the years. Geek by Night entered my life much later than it did for everyone else in the room right now, and it's given me a lot. It gave me the entertainment and joy of an epic story full of lovable characters. It gave me all of these wonderful moments of reflection and camaraderie across dozens of episodes of Beyond Geek by Night. But most of all, it brought into my life some of the most creatively talented, kind-hearted, hardworking, and compassionate humans that I've ever met. And this isn't the end of Beyond Geek by Night. We will have more episodes after this to discuss the show with various contributors. And as we discussed, who knows if this is even, you know, the end of these characters, but it's the end of this chapter and of the show and of this chapter of our lives. So I say this with all the gratitude in the world. Thank you so much for listening to this show. Thank you for supporting this independent production full of wildly talented creators devoting their time and talents. Thank you for opening your ears to a show full of secret quotes and Gibson's obscure references. Thank you for opening your hearts to the show about growing up and about how selflessness and heroism might just be the same thing. Thank you for listening to this scrappy little underdog of a show. I hope it gave you as much as it gave me. I will see you when I see you, and until then, have a super day.